Lots of expectant fishermen from near and far have, for the last century, made the pilgrimage to the Em River for the chance to face the river's big sea trout. You can fish in spring, summer and autumn, but the autumn fishing in August and September is what provides the ultimate challenge for the fly fisherman. And now in the autumn they arrive, the giants of the Em, ready to secure the future of this exceptional breed. And it's now you get the chance to tempt your dream trout to take your fly. There's a loaded atmosphere in the air. You know they're out there, and every day someone sees his dream come true. The waters of the Em have many qualities. The large sea trout are just a part of this unique fishing experience. There's a special Em ethos, including love for the river and the giant sea trout, the delightful comradeship, closeness to nature, and above all, the peace of mind created by this magical river. A lot of fishermen have come and gone over the years, but this unique spirit and feeling for the Em is passed from generation to generation. Today's fishermen are just as captivated by the magic of the Em as were those who once started to fish these exciting waters. We're going to follow the autumn fishing over 2 seasons in the lower reaches of the Em, the final 4 kilometres to the bay where the Em meets the sea. These waters belong to the Em estates, and we're definitely on classic ground and in classic pools. A lot of the pools are named after some of Em's greatest fishermen, who each had their own favourite. Barrett Pool gets its name from Walter H. Barrett. In 1926, he was in the first group of fishing guests, together with Lord Newton and the Swede Theodor Ankerkrona, one of the leading fishermen of the time. He's also had a pool christened in his name, and at each pool you can find a bird box with the pool name on it. furthest down at the outlet to the sea is, of course, Sea Pool, where the fishing is greatly affected by the seawater level, the weather and wind. The pools from the sea up to the bridge at the manor house were mainly those that were fished in the old days. The pools are short and often quite deep. The lies are closely packed and there's a lot to investigate. Even after years of fishing here, there are always new and interesting spots to discover. Today we fish over a much larger stretch of the river. There are lots of delightful pools above the bridge. The waters are more changeable, from quiet areas to strong currents and rapids. There are quite a few shallow, stony stretches, but even these have a lot of good lies. You'll be surprised in what shallow waters the trout can be found. Right up at the mill there's Lock Pool and Mill Pool, while higher up there's a stretch with quieter waters. You can also find trout here, but most people fish between the mill and the sea. The best thing about fishing on the Em is that you never feel crowded. If you arrive at a pool to find it occupied, you just carry on to the next. There's always an empty spot for fishing. You never see fishermen rushing through the woods to be first. You fish calmly and peacefully. Everyone has a choice of wonderful fishing stretches without stress and crowding. And the lower reaches of the river from the Manor House Bridge are off limits until 10 AM for all fishing. So if you want to lie in the morning, you can still have access to unfished pools. There's been fishing on the Em since the early Middle Ages, while the estate dates back to the 1300s. The first manor house was built in the 1600s, but was looted and burnt down by those dreadful Danes after the Battle of Lund in 1767. Today's main house, dating from the early 1800s, was a lively place with lots of families living here, as well as fishing guests. Today, the main building and two wings are used for fishing and hunting guests. The manor has always been the focal point for fishing and plays an important part in creating that sense of belonging that fishing on the Em imparts. The park boasts a unique two-storey gazebo from 1790, which has been lovingly restored to its former glory. In one corner of the park, there's an overgrown, tumble-down wall which has its own story to tell. This is the remains of the orangery, where once exotic fruits were grown for the manor. They could enjoy these unusual fruits in winter, but it demanded an enormous amount of labour. To keep the building warm on cold days, they had to keep fires burning around the clock.
Härligt.
If you stay in one of the wings, you should take the chance to enjoy your lunch in the park. And enjoying a long lunch in the gardens together with good friends is an integral part of the fishing experience.
Ja, det satt fint.
As evening falls, the concept of fishing Danish style is clearly revealed. Dinners of the better kind are given, and all the fishermen contribute both the ingredients and their culinary skills. Fillet of deer flambé in cognac, with a good wine after a day's fishing, gives us the total experience which for many characterises Em fishing. Some fishermen prefer a lie-in after yesterday's intensive fishing and perhaps some heavy red wines, while others love the early morning fishing. When the sun rises over the sea, the first fisherman might already be at the pools above the Manor House Bridge, or perhaps you're the first today. The deer have made their way down to the river to graze, the birds are singing in the trees, and the cold morning mist is breaking up. These early mornings let you experience the very best of the natural life around the river, a rich reward. Nature's a little drowsy, so everything gets going at a pleasantly slow pace, which perfectly suits the fisherman who's just left his warm bed. During the morning, the airs become gradually warmer and the mist has lifted. Even the water warms up a few tenths of a degree, and this can get the fish in a taking mood. Some of the fishermen move down below the bridge to start fishing at 10 o'clock, while others stay with the upper reaches. At midday, almost everyone's out fishing, but by the afternoon, a lot of fishermen have left the river for a well-deserved lunch and a short rest. But those who are still on the river now have a chance to fish undisturbed over a larger area, which often gives results. As the afternoon progresses, the expectant fishermen find their ways back to the river, looking forward to the excitement of the dusk and night fishing. This is the most intensive period of the day, and the level of activity is high both among the fishermen and the fish. As twilight approaches, we're very eager to fish, but you must take the time to plan for night fishing and find a spot where you can fish when it's completely dark. A good spot is where you can manage both rod and line without getting tangled up, and where you can fish from land, or where you really know the river bottom if you're thinking of wading, otherwise it can be a bit risky. You can get a fly hook in your neck or a dip in the river if you're not careful. Hooking a fish in the dead of night is an extra thrill. Unable to see the fish, your senses are intensified. To hear the splashes, feel the fish's movement vibrate along the rod are exceptional experiences.
Ja, börjar gå. På en gång. Ja, jag släpper den.
Ever since the start of organised sport fishing on the Em, the river's giant sea trout have dominated the world record lists for catches on fly. 8 out of 10 records are from the Em, The first catches from 1929 and 1930 weighing in at 12.1 and 12.8 kilos. And one special detail about these catches is that these record fish were caught by Walter H. Barrett, who was in the very first group of guests to fish the Em. There were 4 more world records during the 30s, but then there was a long gap until the next record was achieved in the 70s. And it was Stig Nielsen, one of the well-known locals, who managed to land a trout weighing 13.5 kilos from the home pool.
Det var den 14 september tror jag det var, 73.
It was the 14th of September 1973, and I'd seen this fish before. It had shown itself a few times and was just about here. Not at all a good place for fishing. But I went up there and took it on the first cast. I'd fished for it a few days earlier without success, but that morning it took on the first cast. I had no idea it was such a big fish. It rushed around the pool, but never left it. I was playing the fish for 30 to 45 minutes, and then I landed it on this bank where I'm sitting. I could see it was big, but I'd no idea it was so heavy. A couple of days later, I lost a giant fish. I'd been playing it for almost 45 minutes. It was a beauty. I'd never seen such a big fish. It was a world record for sure. Once I'd got it at my feet, and Kenneth, my fishing partner, standing beside me, asked if he should take it with the gaff. No way, I shouted at Kenneth. It's just too beautiful to put a gaff in. And then it swam over the entire pool one last time, turned at the neck down here, and then just let go of the fly. And the fantastic thing is, I still have the fly. I'll always keep it in my fly box. The hook is straight. So that's one of my fondest memories from here, and the world record, of course.
Ett av mina stora minnen här. Plus den här världsrekordet, det är klart.
"20 years after Stig Nielsen's record, on the 16th of September 1993, Lennart Westerlund experienced the take of his life at Old Man's Place in Pike Pool.
Det var fukt i luften och lite duggregn så det kändes.
The air was damp with some drizzle, so the morning felt a little magical. Suddenly I felt the line tighten, but nothing else happened. So I was sure I'd got stuck in that stone or somewhere nearby. I tried to get the fly loose for several minutes. I tried lifting and sinking, and even released some line and let it float downstream to try and free the fly. Suddenly the rod started rocking. I felt something alive at the other end, quite a shock. I felt a cold sweat coming on, my heart thudding. Then the fish started slowly slipping away downstream. I could feel at once it was very heavy and couldn't hold it at all. It just ran away. Zap, zap, zap went the spool. I then had a long fight, of course. It took a good 20 to 25 minutes before I succeeded in pumping it up and herding it upstream. I locked the reel and walked slowly upstream a good way before turning downstream and reeling in. At last I had the fish at the edge of the grassy bank here, where I could land it. I had to put my hand under the gills and slowly pull it onto the bank. The second attempt worked. It was quite fantastic to see this huge fish lying on the grass. I couldn't believe it. I realized it was a very big trout. I was so tired I had to lie down on my back beside the fish just to relax and wonder about what had happened. The sea trout, a male, weighed 15.27 kilos and is still the world record 13 years later. It was an amazing experience catching this beautiful fish.
Och det var en fantastisk upplevelse att få vara med om det, att ha den här vackra fisken.
Ska jag hjälpa mig, Lasse? Ja,
Lasse, vilken fisk.
Därifrån, 10, 15. Är det det?
Ja,
det är så
det är
långt. Där. Är det där?
Ja.
Det ser jag.
Mm.
Ja. Em Manor. Den tackar vi för.
The Ulfsparre family have owned the Em since the middle of the 18th century, and the income from the fishing has always been important for the upkeep of the estate. The fishing was good, and even with quite simple equipment you could land really fantastic catches, such as this, the result of 4 hours fishing on the morning of the 16th of April 1911. From 1924 until 1987, the fishing rights were owned by Gustav Ulfsparre, who over the years became legendary not only for being a good fisherman, but also for his dedication to fishery conservation. At first, only friends and family fished the river, but a suggestion made by one of the friends, Crown Prince Gustav Adolf, led to the system of taking in paying guests. The prince gave them an introduction to the first fishing party, which was the start of organised sport fishing on the Em. Gustav's son, Göran, has a host of exciting tales from the early days of fishing, but above all, lots of lasting memories of the fisherman.
Jag har ju haft en väldigt spännande och fin uppväxttid.
I've had a good and exciting upbringing here thanks to the fishing.
Jag minns ju
I can remember the very first guests. They were here for the spring fishings, Old friends of my parents, officers. My father was an officer in the Småland Hussars in Eksjö. My father was eager for me to start fishing, and so was I, so he taught me. I remember the first lessons over on the north bank of Home Pool, and then I was hooked. It took me a few years to move up to fly fishing, but then I'd been able to study a few of the fly fishermen. There weren't so many then. Most people were spinning, even down here. But one or two had started, not least my father, who'd learnt from his uncle. That well-known figure, Theodore Ankerkrona, was one of the few who could fly fish, and he was a bit of a showman. He liked to have an audience to admire his casting techniques. There were a lot of very special gentlemen here. An English diplomat was one. He was serving in an embassy in South America, and just before flying over here discovered that overweight baggage was very expensive. Waders and all the equipment weighed a lot, so he wore everything and flew like that. Another Englishman who visited us had lost an arm in the First World War. He designed a harness to hold his rod and managed everything himself. He tied flies using his fingers and teeth. An amazing person. Before the Second World War, when I was a teenager and even before, this was a sport for the upper classes. Most people didn't have holidays and couldn't afford the fishing. Only the rich, the really well-off, could enjoy the sport. But the war led to modern times and changes, quite radical changes. As a result, a different sort of guest came here. The fly fishing enthusiasts who came only for the fantastic fishing. This has developed, in my opinion, into a very important part of the atmosphere around the Em.
The fishermen who come to the Em today have one thing in common, apart from their interest in fishing, and that's a deep feeling for the Em and its unique trout. This feeling has often led to a lifelong relationship, and a lot of people have fished here for years. Some have returned to the Em every year for over 50 years. Every time you meet a rookie on his first visit to the Em, you see the fire in the eyes and hear how yet another fly fisherman has lost his heart to the Em.
Liten är jag inte. Tack, tack. Ja! Nu kör den så.
Our main focus has been on trout and fishing for the giants of the Em in autumn. But you can also fish for sea trout in the spring and for newly arrived fresh salmon in the summer. These salmon can reach quite impressive weights, and even if they're difficult to get on the hook in early summer, they get going during the autumn, just as the trout start running. So the fly fisherman can get some interesting bonus catches while he's fishing for trout in the autumn. The autumn salmon have been in the river for a good while now and are starting to get a darker colour, but there's nothing wrong with their fighting spirit.
Du är alldeles darrig i benen.
A lot of really good salmon are landed every autumn, but autumn fishing for sea trout is never easy, so these salmon are a welcome addition to the catch.
Dags.
Bred.
Ja, det är det.
Var det här du har i kväken?
Nej, tack. Ja, de här.
Uppe på fullt.
Thank you. Tack för hjälpen.
Alltså, jag fick en kanske. Ja.
Over the years, a lot of big salmon have been caught in the Em, but in 2008 the biggest so far was landed, a male salmon weighing an impressive 26.6 kilos.
Lax.
The Em is 240 kilometres long, while the stretch available for salmon is at present only 50 kilometres, up to Högsby. From time immemorial, the migrating fish have used 150 kilometres of the Em for spawning, from the sea to the natural migratory barrier at Edelfors. When the dams on the Em were built at the start of the last century, the salmon and sea trout could only migrate freely on the lowest 5 kilometres of the river. By using poorly functioning fish ladders at Emsfors and Karlshamn, some of the fish could just manage to get up to Finnsjö, a total of 30 kilometres. And there the migration stopped abruptly for most of the 20th century. In 2001, a further 20 kilometres of water was made available through new fish channels at Finnsjö. In 2006, the lower power station at Emsfors was bought and closed down, a unique event in Sweden. Unfortunately, this is still a difficult migration for the fish, and most of them don't get past all the obstacles. And if they do, there's an equally difficult journey back to the sea for them, as well as for the smolts. The Em's breed of giant sea trout has always interested researchers, and lots of different projects have been carried out to study their living conditions. One way is to use low-voltage electricity to stun the fish, in order to find out the density of smolt and fry in the river. To improve breeding prospects in the lower reaches, Em Estate has for many years carried out improvements such as cleaning spawning grounds, clearing reeds and improving breeding environments. A big fish has been sighted in home pool and it's stopped at a good place. When a new fish has settled in the pool and is active, then you need to get there quickly to place the fly in front of it.
Riktigt klassisk drivning det här.
Åh, så fin den är. Ja. Ta en bild här från Jonas.
Så, nu får det räcka.
The life cycle of the sea trout ends in the autumn when the spawning fish return to their birthplace. The migration of these spawning fish goes on all autumn, and the first trout can arrive as early as July to wait for spawning in October. Trout want richly oxygenated gravel beds, and their instinct leads them to choose areas that won't be dried out at low water. After spawning, the sea trout spend winter in the river before returning to the sea in the spring. The results of their spawning can be seen in April and May as the eggs hatch. The fry stay in the river for 1 to 2 years before developing into smolt and making ready for life in salt water. During this phase, the fry becomes a shiny smolt, learns to tolerate salt water, and above all, starts growing much faster. Smolts make their way down to the estuary, where they quickly grow bigger. After a few years in the sea, the trout return to the river to spawn. Sea trout can come back several times to spawn, while a salmon rarely does. Another large sea trout has taken the fly, and the numerous stones in the Em make it difficult to control the fish.
One megaöring.
Nej!
Ja, det var skitstor rörelse. Sån här då.
The catch was quickly returned to the water. A pity we didn't see more of that fine trout. When returning a fish to the water, you should handle it carefully and never with dry hands. It's best not to lift the fish out of the water, and you should make sure it doesn't hurt itself on the sharp stones in the shallow water, which is a risk with larger fish. When you've released a fish, let it rest to get its strength back. When it's got its balance and can swim under its own steam, let it glide away. You need to make the process short, and this applies to playing, landing and releasing the fish. Reduce the stress levels. Mikael Frödin has been fishing the Em since the early 80s and is a well-known figure in the fishing world. Over the years, he's landed a lot of big trout in waters throughout the world, and his personal best is from 1984, 11 kilos and, of course, taken on the Em. A few years have passed since that fish, and Mikael's caught 8 fish weighing over 10 kilos here, but the dream of an even bigger trout is still alive. Every season, every day's fishing and every cast in the tempting currents of the river is a step closer to that dream trout. And then suddenly you feel that heavy take. You just know this is a really big one.
Nu är det öring i 10 kilos klassen. Stor och bred som en ladugårdsvägg. Titta! Nästan 1 meter havsöring. Sitter i mungipan. Kanske går bra. Titta! Ska vi ta det försiktigt? Shit, här ska jag in i huvudet. Du måste ha bredvis.
There are lots of exciting fishing waters around the world, and just as many interesting species to catch. But the Em and its trout have a special place in the hearts of the Em fishermen. Yes, these giant sea trout are unique. Yes, the landscape around the manor house is fantastic. And yes, you get a sense of history as you wander under the oaks along the bank. But to be an Em fisherman is so much more. It's a much more profound feeling. And it's this feeling that makes you return year after year in the hope of dueling with the giants of the Em.